From the Missouri School of Journalism, welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. In 1983, journalist Alfred Friendly launched an exchange program with journalists all over the world. The Alfred Friendly Press Partners Fellowship brings a group of foreign journalists to the United States for work experience and journalistic training they might not get in their home countries. The experience also allows these journalists to find links between the communities they work in here in the U.S. and those they come from. Today on Global Journalist, we're fortunate to talk to a few of the Alfred Friendly Fellows about their careers and their experiences. I'm joined now by Anastasia Farina of the Kiev Post, who is currently working at the Chicago Tribune. Nastya, welcome to Global Journalist.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I was hoping you'd tell us just a little bit about your situation working at the Chicago Tribune. What differences have you seen between how the Tribune operates and how the Kiev Post operates?
Well, Chicago Tribune is a huge publication. They are lucky to have such a big newsroom because back at home in the Kiev Post we have just about 15 people, while in the Chicago Tribune they've got 2 floors and in the huge building and about 400 reporters. So they've got a lot of people to produce coverage for almost everything happening in Chicago and Illinois. And actually, they've got daily newspaper, while Kiev Post is weekly. But we have the website, which is updated constantly. And actually, since the Euromaidan revolution started in November 2013, we started paying more attention to our website because we've got many visitors on the website from abroad who's been interested in the events in Ukraine and who consider the Kiev Post to be one of the reputable and credible news publications in Ukraine.
As I understand it, you were in Kiev during the Euromaidan protests in December and January, but you've been in the United States since March, so you haven't been in Ukraine during the current round of conflict between separatists in the east and the Ukrainian government. While you were in Ukraine, how was the media covering the Maidan protests? What was it like to be a reporter then? Can you tell us something about that?
Well, for the Kiev Post, it was really hard since we've got very few people, but still some of our reporters were going to eastern parts of Ukraine, to Crimea, to cover the events right there, to cover from the place where the protests. When it all started in Kiev, of course, we've been covering it in Kiev. But then, when the situation was in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine, of course, we sent a lot of reporters to that parts of Ukraine to do coverage there.
And tell me how does the Ukrainian public perceive Ukrainian reporters? Do they view them as being independent of news events or of factions, or do they tend to view them as being on one side, on the separatist side, on the Russian side, on the Kiev government side? How does that play out?
I think Ukrainians are selective when reading newspapers, since some of the biggest media outlets in Ukraine used to be owned by rich businessmen. We call them oligarchs who have links with the government, because there were several cases last year when journalists quit newspapers or magazines, citing censorship on behalf of the editors, and actually those publications used to be owned by oligarchs.
And how does that play out at the Kiev Post?
Since 1995, the newspaper has been independent, and the owners never interfered with the editorial policy. And
that's a true story of globalization then, that Pakistani businessman owns a prominent English language newspaper in Ukraine, which incidentally this year won the Missouri Honor Medal.
Oh, yeah.
As well. I wanted to ask you as well about the role of Russian media in Ukraine. There's been a lot of discussion about information wars as playing a role in the current conflict. Now, while you were in Ukraine during the Maidan protests that led to President Yanukovych's resignation, how influential was Russian television, Russian media over how the public perceived what was going on?
Still, even here, I think Ukrainians have been really selective when reading or watching something. For example, I think everybody heard and everybody knows about the first Russian channel that has been very active when doing the news about Ukraine, since they were showing the situation from their point of view, which has been really different from what was really going on in Ukraine. So I think the influence of that information war, of that information policy of the Russian media, I think that affected Russian citizens, since they have no choice. They have just several channels, or I don't know, dozens channels, which stick to a certain policy, while in Ukraine you still have a choice. You can read something else. You do not have to watch Russian TV channels.
Let me ask you as well about the Kiev Post. Have you seen that they have been in any way targeted by Russia as part of this information war? Have there been cyber attacks?
Since I left, I don't really follow. I don't have the opportunity to see what's going on right now, but I haven't heard about any specific cases of targeting our newspaper, and we are lucky that our reporters who go to Eastern Ukraine or Crimea to cover the events are safe and are coming back from there.
What preparations has the Kiev Post taken to protect their reporters?
They're just brave.
You've been listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. I want to give our thanks to Anastasia Forina of the Kiev Post for joining us today.
Thank you, Jason.
You can listen to this and other full episodes of Global Journalist on our website. That's globaljournalist.org. For more Global Journalist content, you can also like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter @GlobalJourn. I'm now joined by Sharif Tarek of Aram Online in Cairo, who is working at the Los Angeles Times during a stay in the United States. Welcome to Global Journalist, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I was hoping that you could tell us just a little bit about Aram Online and its relationship with the Egyptian government and with Aram newspaper, which is Egypt's largest daily.
Al-Ahram is the largest news organization in the Middle East, and Ahram Online is the English website of that organization. We pretty much work completely independently since the website was launched in 2010. Usually the Arabic paper comes across as the mouthpiece of the government, and people who don't check the website quite often would think that we adopt the same editorial policy, but that's not true. We're completely free. We don't take any kind of instructions or any, we don't have any interferences in our work.
I was hoping you could tell us about some of your public experiences, your experiences reporting on either some of the demonstrations that led to President Mubarak's ouster or to President Morsi's ouster, or some of the demonstrations against the current president.
I've been covering protests and clashes since shortly after the revolution. I mean, I joined Ahram Online shortly after the revolution, the 2011 revolution, and I covered quite a few protests and clashes. I remember there was I was there during the first clashes that erupted after the revolution. That was during the second sit-in to be staged as far as I remember, yeah, that was in July, I think. Yeah, uh, it was a second sit-in staged by many political forces to call for the fulfillment of the revolution's demands. And then things turned bad, and then there was tear gas and stuff like that. So that I remember I covered that one, and it turned a bit ugly. I mean, no one died.
How so?
I mean, there was a lot of tear gas, and it was really hot, and I was running back and forth with people, and I've seen people who got injured, but nothing serious. But I mean, with birdshot and people suffering the effect of tear gas, and that was not that was not really the worst kind of clashes. We had much worse.
What was the media environment like during that period in Egypt?
During the elections or afterwards, you mean?
After Morsi came to power?
After Morsi came to power, after he came to power, actually, he was quite popular. I mean, when he appeared in Tahrir Square and when he took oath there, and he's, told everybody that he will fulfill the demands of the revolutions and he would achieve social justice and so forth. And during that period, he was quite popular in his early days in office. And then I think the media loyal to the old regime has always been critical of him. But even during that early days of his rule, when he was somewhat popular, they gave him a break. They didn't really criticize him that strongly.
And
So.
now what has changed since Morsi was ousted a year ago?
The media is now, it's not, I can't really say it's polarized because all the pro-Islamist media outlets are over, except for Al Jazeera because they are not in Egypt. But I mean, we had like many channels. They used to be known as religious channels because they are, pro-Islamists, but I wouldn't call them entirely religious. But anyway,
Well,
these
what
channels,
happened to them?
upon Morsi's ouster, they were all off air.
Okay, so the government took them off the air.
Yes,
Okay.
upon his ouster, all of them, all at once. So, yeah.
I want to ask you as well about the Al Jazeera trial, which has attracted a lot of attention internationally.
Sure.
Journalists Peter Grest, Mohammed Fahmy, and Bahir Mohammed were sentenced to 7 to 10 years in jail. How has this trial been viewed by the Egyptian public? How is it viewed within the Egyptian media?
It looks really bad because not a single piece of evidence was submitted against them. And I think that eventually they will be released, but still, it makes the whole judiciary looks really really bad. And but again,
Do you see that this has a chilling effect on other reporters or other journalists?
Not really, because many people think this is a part of a crackdown on press freedom. It's really not. It's part of a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood because Al Jazeera is considered to be a media arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, and actually it's Al Jazeera Arabic who has always been pro Brotherhood in a very obvious way. Al Jazeera English, the channel is much more professional, but only a few people would tell the difference. So I think these journalists, they just pay the price for working for Al Jazeera. That's all. My publication, for example, we haven't changed anything since he came in power. So far it's still pretty much the same. We still have more freedom than under Mubarak. But I would say...
So you don't feel like a reporter in your publication, they're not going to be stopped from saying, let's pursue this article about corruption involving a government official?
No, not at all. But that might change. I'm just commenting because I talk to the people, to my colleagues in Egypt like almost every day to check out on things because I know things are crazy in Cairo. So
now, during the revolution and afterwards, there was a lot of coverage of sectarian strife in Egypt and fighting between Muslims and Christians. What role did you see that media had in driving that?
the pro-Islamist channels, actually, they just added fuel to fire big time during that period because, well, many of the Islamists are sectarian. I mean, many of them hate Copts and they wouldn't feel ashamed of saying it one way or another. And they just, I mean, the inflammatory speech and, I mean, inciting violence in a very evident way, that really just makes sectarian strife take a turn for the worse, like big time during that period. And it was not only between Muslims and Copts, it was also between Sunni and Shias. We have a very negligible Shia minority in Egypt, and I remember this very ugly incident was actually videotaped, and the video is available on YouTube. They lynched like 4 Shia figures in somewhere near Cairo, and it was all videotaped, and they just lynched them for no reason. Just one day after, I can't remember exactly what happened, but there was, again, that was a result of inflammatory speech by Sunni figures who just keep spreading hate and violence.
Sharif Tarek, a senior reporter and deputy editor at Al Ahram Online, I want to thank you for joining us here on Global Journalist today.
Thank you.
You're listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. We're talking to a few of this year's Alfred Friendly Fellows, foreign journalists who are working in the United States to learn more about journalism here. You can listen to this and other full episodes of Global Journalist on our website. That's globaljournalist.org. For more Global Journalist content, you can also like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter @GlobalJourn. I'm now joined by Asma Gribi, a freelancer based in Tunisia who's working at the Wall Street Journal. She also blogs for foreign policy. Welcome to Global Journalist. I want to ask you, Asma, if you could tell us just a little bit about what it was like to work as a reporter, to work in media in Tunisia prior to the Arab Spring, prior to the toppling of President Ben Ali.
Being a journalist before the revolution can be called other things, but not really a journalist, because people were not even we were not able to report on any subject we want. For example, I had like a limited experience of being a journalist before the revolution, and we couldn't, for example, talk about politics. You forget about that. The main subjects that we were able to tackle were like culture, social problems, like those things, but not politics.
So if you talk about social problems,
but
how do you talk about social problems?
Like, social problems like, like gender issues, like, oh, do you think, I don't know, do you think a guy should pay, or do you think, those like, like funny issues, but you cannot go into like socio-economic or like serious social problems like, I don't know, like unemployment or social injustice or anything. But my experience before, I remember like the manager of the net radio I worked with, he would tell us like, no politics, you can talk about anything you want.
And what would happen to you? What would happen to those journalists who tested those limits?
I mean, like, it didn't happen to me. I was still like young, and it was the very start of my career, so I didn't even try, and my experience was very limited. But I saw there are other stories about journalists who dared and who criticized the regime and all of that, and they ended up in jail or ended up having to like leave the country. Some journalists were even shot or killed, or so like this. There was like serious threat to journalists. We were not just talking about harassment or intimidation. Now, it's like life-threatening.
Talk to us about how things began to change during the Arab Spring. And I understand that you also worked with an English language news startup at that time. Yes. How did people decide, okay, now is the time where we feel like we can speak freely or more freely about what's happening in the country?
Actually, freedom of expression and freedom of speech were the main demands of the people who were protesting during the revolution. And there was like people were saying, we want dignity, freedom, and jobs. And one day, and the censorship in Tunisia also involved the censorship of the internet. So we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have so many other websites. And on the revolution happened on January 14th. On January 13th, the former Tunisian president gave a speech trying to convince the people that...
This is Ben Ali.
Yeah, Ben Ali. He said, like, he was saying, like, I changed, I'm going to give you more freedoms. And on January 13th, people, for the first time in years, Tunisians were able to check out YouTube. And so he tried. That was like the last thing he tried to do, but that was the end. And by 24
and so that was
hours,
the moment when you knew things had changed for good.
Yeah, that was like the last night. And the one day after that, he fled the country to Saudi Arabia. And for example, the website that I worked for after the revolution that was like something impossible before the revolution. We were not able to, we wouldn't have been able to do that.
Could you talk just a little bit about sort of the legacy of the Arab Spring, which I think many people view fairly pessimistically now, given that Libya seems to be ruled by militias. In Egypt, we've seen the military assert itself again. Syria is mired in civil war. In Yemen, it seems to be a failed state. In Tunisia, the story's been a little bit different. Why?
I think, first of all, what happened in Tunisia was not just a spillover of a different revolution. This is not like most of the other countries. They were inspired by what happened in Tunisia. I think Tunisia is the only, let's say, like the original revolution. It happened there not because it happened, in another country and people were saying like, oh, if it happened in Tunisia, probably it will work here. They probably did not have the recipe. I'm not sure we have the recipe in Tunisia. It's still very early to judge whether this will lead to a real success and whether, our weak democracy will be strong enough and will survive. I'm not sure, but at least judging the map now of the Middle East and seeing the different attempts to, to have a freer system and all of that, we can see that the only case or that seems to be working, as you said, is Tunisia. I think, as I said, because it started there, but I would also say Tunisia is a small country. It's not also very important. I think there are I always say that, thank God, we're not important. We're just, a tiny North African country. Nobody's interested. We don't have oil like Libya. This is not, I don't know. Also, the other thing, I'm not sure it's good or bad, but at least there is less, let's say, sectarian tensions in Tunisia. It's more, it's all 99% Sunnis. We have Christian and Jewish communities, but they're not very vocal. And I think most people in Tunisia are you can say Tunisia is more of a, it's not very diverse. There are not many religions and all of that, and it's not something that I don't think that what happened in Syria will happen in Tunisia because we don't have as many sects and religions and all of that. The other thing, for example, we can look at Egypt and say why Tunisia avoided the Egyptian scenario. The Tunisian military has always been neutral and not very involved in politics. So that's probably why. And so many people in Tunisia, even after the revolution, people were expecting, oh, now the military will step in. Now, people kept expecting that. But at the same time, if you look at Tunisia's history, that's something that will not happen. And that's something not very expected because that's not how the country works. And that's not how the military has acted throughout the Tunisian history. The other thing, I think also in Tunisia we have less poverty if you compare it to other, I don't know, to Egypt or...
So there are fewer social tensions then?
Yeah, I mean, we still have, for example, the main problem in Tunisia is unemployment and the unbalanced regional development, the nepotism and the corruption of the former regime. For example, if you look at Tunisia's map, you will find just few areas are, let's say, advanced enough and they can afford enough jobs for their people, but the other regions, they will be really impoverished and all of that. So those are the main problems for Tunisia, but still, I think also the other good thing in Tunisia is the relatively high literacy rate. If Tunisia, I think it has the highest literacy rate in I'm not sure, but I think in North Africa and the Middle East too. Tunisia also has more of a, like its politics, they tend to be more progressive and secular, though we're not sure about that because we had an Islamist government. And now we're growing more and more aware that the secularism in Tunisia was more,
Yes,
opposed.
now let's back up for a minute, because after the fall of Ben Ali, there were elections in Tunisia, and what's often described in the West as a moderate Islamist group won the follow-up elections. We're going to see the second elections now. What do you see happening going forward?
I think most Tunisian political parties now are aware that Tunisia cannot be ruled by one party. So even like now, I've been following what's happening in Tunisia, and most political parties, even like there are rumors about few political parties are agreeing on one presidential candidate. I think after the political crisis and a few months ago, everyone I think now agrees that compromise is the solution for Tunisia's future. They have to kind of agree on a.
So there has to be some compromise between the secular liberals and the Islamists.
Yes.
Then.
Yeah.
Well, we have just a little over a minute left. I want to ask you as well about your experience in the United States. You've been working at the Wall Street Journal. What differences are there between how journalists in America at a big newspaper like that, what differences are there between how they approach their jobs and approach the news as compared with those journalists in Tunisia?
I think the main difference now, if we're comparing journalism here in Tunisia, is that here at least this is an established democracy, even with its flaws. So people, and even so, journalism here has its traditions, and there are like rules and structures, and like people know how to do things. At least in Tunisia, we don't have that. It's just had like a revolution 3 years ago, so we're still even like trying to know how to do things. Balanced journalism, that's something that didn't exist before. So many people, like all of us in Tunisia, we're still learning and accustoming ourselves to this new environment of freedom. So that's, I think, the main difference. So now when I work with the Wall Street Journal, and I was lucky enough to, like, for example, attend editorial meetings and all of that when deciding on stories or like choosing headlines, and I would like hear the kind of conversations that, for example, I'm sure that so many newsrooms in Tunisia they don't have.
Like what?
Like, I don't know, like trying to be politically correct, or trying to choose the right word, or not to have like, I don't know, like those catchy headlines that are not necessarily accurate. The state of Tunisian media now is they're just crazy. You can find everything there.
That's all for this edition of Global Journalist, a production of the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Our thanks to our guest today and to the Alfred and Jean Friendly Foundation. Our executive producer is Casey Morell. Our lead producers this week are Varvara Fomina and Olga Krusteleva, with assistance from Jessica Ananya and Batul Hassan. Travis McMillan from the Reynolds Journalism Institute is our technical director, and Pat Akers of KBIA is our audio engineer. Join us again next time for another edition of Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. Thanks for listening.